And welcome to this week's edition of the Reigns on the Cardinals podcast here on STLSportsPage.com from our St. Louis studio. Rob Reigns, Mike Reigns with us as we look ahead to the final 9 games of the Cardinals season.
It got here pretty quick,
It
didn't it?
did. It always does.
It always does, but it got here pretty quick.
Sometimes I think it goes fast. Well, I should say, I think the season goes faster when the team is playing well. I think sometimes a team is not playing well. It kind of tends to drag a little bit. But I think we had enough things going on during the course of the season that maybe took away that feeling that it was the dog days or slowing down.
Yeah, that's probably true too. Or, the just really lack of competitiveness, I would say, for the last month against this team too, kind of changed the look of it.
3-7 in the last 10 games, and you're pointing out and I guess mathematically they're still technically alive in the wild card hunt, but realistically there is no chance of making the playoffs. But just a couple of games going a little differently the last couple of days might have made the last week more interesting.
Well, and you could look back on the season at just how many one-run losses there were, and obviously any one of those go the other way, it's a different story. But just lately, you look at an extra inning games in Seattle that could have gone their way. You look at a game where you had a 7-run lead and give up another 7 runs to let them tie the game. So, there are games like that are frustrating, and you're 4.5 back right now in the wild card, chasing 4 teams, and you pick up 2 of those wins, and all of a sudden you're 2.5 back, and it's a different story.
And you do have to go 7-2 over the final 9 games just to get to 500, which is probably going to be a tough challenge. You got 3 games against Milwaukee, the last 3 games at home this weekend, and then of course you go to San Francisco and Chicago next week to end the season. So no easy assignments on any of those games.
Definitely no easy assignments, right? And we knew that going into it, right? So, this team sometimes plays better, I guess, against tougher competition. The only thing we can hope for is that a team like the Brewers may not really matter to them right now because they're already in. So,
except I still think they're trying to stave off the Phillies to get that top spot so they get the bye in the first round. So, they have something to prove for as well.
And the Cubs, may not when we get to them, right? It just really
those
depends
3 games
on
might not
those 3 games may not matter at all, right? But the games that you have coming up here, Milwaukee, very important, and the Giants also trying to get into one of those last wild card spots.
They're still hanging on in there. I think that what I want to do today mostly, and not to say that we're writing off the last 9 games, but one of the things that we talked about the whole entire season here has been quote unquote the runway, and who was going to get an opportunity to play and what were they going to do with that opportunity. I think now as you start to kind of reflect a little bit and look back, even though we do have 9 games left to go in the season, you can kind of already make some judgments about players who have, I think, taken advantage of the opportunity and where it leads them, in the plans for this winter and the plans for next year. That's still to be determined, but they've done what they could do at this point, which is show that they, took advantage of that chance. And I think you and I both agree that the player who comes out on top of that list, based on especially what the expectations were when this season began, is Alec Burleson.
Absolutely. Alec Burleson has done everything that you've wanted him to do. And to me, one of the more impressive things that he's done is his defense. His ability to play in the outfield and first base both, have really allowed him a little more versatility. But I think that John Jay has done great work with him and really progressing in right field when Jordan Walker was struggling a little bit.
And I think Ali Marmol, we were talking about this the other day in Ali's office in one of the pregame scrums, and I think the interesting thing that he pointed out about Burleson, as far as especially his work in left field is concerned, okay, he's never going to be the fastest guy. He's never going to have there's going to be some balls that he's not going to get to because of his speed, but he doesn't seem like he ever really makes a mistake. I mean, when he gets to the ball, he catches it. When he gets to the ball, he throws it to the right base. I mean, again, and that's probably some of the work he's put in with John Jay. Fundamentally, he's very, very solid out there.
You could think of him kind of like, I know this is not the same comparison because one was an MVP and one is not going to be, but he's similar to Paul Goldschmidt in the sense that he understands the game and where to go, right? He doesn't steal a lot of bases. He just got out for the first time the other day, but it's one of those where he understands for the most part when the ball comes to him what to do and where to be, and that makes a big difference, from a baseball standpoint.
Yeah, because that's they always say the players who are the steadiest and most reliable players are those who make the routine plays. You just don't want to screw up a routine play. Every once in a while, you want to make a great play and everything too. But I've been very impressed with how he's played in the outfield. But the problem with Alec Burleson is if you start to kind of project where what that means for him over the winter, what that means for him for 2026, I don't have a great answer to that yet. because I think he's actually played himself into a spot where other teams might want him in a potential trade. He's also arbitration eligible player, for next year. Could he be an everyday left fielder? Probably on this team, but at what what expense? I mean, if Alec Burleson is your starting left fielder, then somebody's not playing. Newbar, Herrera, somebody. So
that's my question for you. Right, based on the results you've seen this season, would you start Alec Burleson ahead of Lars Nootbaar and or ahead of Jordan Walker?
But here's the thing: if you're going to trade an outfielder, who's going to give you the highest value in a possible trade out of those three guys? Alec Burleson.
He might, for sure.
I could also. I think he's played. Like you said, he's played a very good first base.
But I think you have to let the age play into that a little bit too. And I think the bigger question for somebody like Chaim Bloom is, who's your everyday first baseman after Contreras is gone?
Right.
Does Burleson fill that gap, or is Blaze Jordan ready to go?
We don't know the answer to that yet. The other thing I think, by the way, speaking of Burleson, and I've noticed this in the clubhouse. I've noticed it on the lineup. When they're up batting. Is he and Jimmy Crooks could they be twins? I mean, they almost look like the same guy.
The two that I think do look like the same guy, and we're probably going to get to them at some point here, though, that I think are twins when they come in, are Leahy and Swanson.
Yeah, they do look a lot like
those are the two that I think are twins.
Of course, remind you that you can get this podcast anywhere. You can get all of your downloads on the Spotify and every other streaming platform. I appreciate everybody who's also signed up for the YouTube channel. Just a reminder, we'll have one more regular season podcast next week. And then when we hit the off season, I'm not saying we'll have a podcast every week, but we will have regular podcasts throughout the winter as things merit, and we hope it's a busy winter.
And we hope so too. And send us your questions too, because if there's enough questions that come in, you can do it on Facebook or reigns@stlsportspage.com. Send us the questions you want us to talk about. And if there's enough to come through, we'll definitely try to do some more in the off season to kind of fill the news here.
A couple other players I want to bring up, talk about this runway thing. Another guy who I think, especially offensively, has taken big strides this year and proven that he can be an everyday player in the big leagues at some spot, is Ivan Herrera.
And I think the biggest question mark about Herrera is defensively, where does he play?
Right.
And I think that there's a big question for Chaim to figure out what he does with him, because offensively he's been great. And, the lack that we were looking there for a while was a right-handed bat, because him and Walker were just hurt, not coming through. And so I think having him healthy and doing what he can, we've seen that the power's there, but where does he play?
He wants to catch. And I don't know that his future here is as a catcher. I don't know that at age 24 or whatever he is going to play at next year, you want to label a guy a full-time DH, and that's only where he plays. I don't know what happened to the left field experiment that they said he was going to play some in left field and was consistent for 4 games, and haven't seen any of that for the last month. And Ollie was asked the other day about Herrera playing left, here between now and the end of the season. He said probably not. So somewhere that disappeared. So I think he's another guy that you have to put into that category of let's, other teams are going to bring up his name. Other teams are going to, make you an offer for him apparently. And depending on where he fits into your lineup next year, I think you have to listen.
You've got a handful of guys that I think have played themselves into being good players that have shown the potential to be really good. And so does that open up the trade bait ability? But I think the conversation has to be had. Fans aren't going to these games right now.
Mm-hmm.
So is a player like Alec Burleson or Ivan Herrera, who the fans like to see, is that going to change or persuade what they want to do? Because at some point they need to sell tickets. And if there's nobody on this team to watch, why would they come?
But you also, if you play these guys and you would basically probably expect a similar level of performance out of them next year that gave you about a 500 team this year, and you have a chance to move them to give you something that maybe has a chance to win more games, that's what I think you have to look at. I think the biggest thing that this club can do to bring fans back onto the field at Busch Stadium is win.
Correct. But what I was going to say is that, wouldn't you rather trade some of the players? And I understand it's harder to do that, but the guys that aren't producing.
Well, sure.
I hate to say this, but the guy that just hasn't figured it out yet is Jordan Walker.
But there again, when you're looking at making a trade and somebody sees unless they think, okay, we see what's wrong with Jordan Walker and we think we can fix him, what are you going to get back? I mean,
What-
I know maybe it's addition by subtraction. I don't know, because obviously he's going to play if he's here. But to me, the two guys that I would put on, and I'm just going to get to them in a minute. We'll go ahead and talk about now. The two guys that I don't think are going to get traded this winter are Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman, because I think their trade value is low. And to me, one of the years baseball executives, and I can't remember now who it was, years and years ago, told me something, and I think it's a very apt conversation, and I think it's a problem the Cardinals have made in the past, is holding on to a player for too long, and not just go ahead and cutting. So maybe it is the decision to cut these guys now, even though the trade value is very low. But again, by the same token, and then you look at the Burleson and Herreras, and the flip side, is it better to trade a guy a year too soon when their trade value is as high as it's going to be? A case in point, Carlos Martinez a few years ago. Cardinals could have traded him when he was like coming off an all-star season and gotten an awful lot in return. I remember asking somebody when Chris Sale was traded by the, I was the White Sox to the Red Sox.
Yep.
And how big package he got. I said, what would the Cardinals get for Carlos Martinez? And it was a similar type package, but they didn't do it. And then his trade value totally disappeared. So to me, if you're looking at building this club through trades, which I think is, you and I both agree is going to be the way that they have to go, because I don't think they're going to have the money to spend on top level free agents this winter. To me, the players that you're going to want to acquire are going to require trading a player that you probably don't want to trade. And it's going to be an uncomfortable winter in that standpoint.
And I think the other thing that's going to be uncomfortable too is you're going to have to trade guys that you thought are going to be the guy. For example, Jordan Walker. Have we seen enough out of Jordan Walker to know that he can put together a season where he can hit 280 and 25 home runs?
I don't know. They have the answer to that.
And if the answer is no, then why are we going to trade somebody like Burleson who is doing that when we're basically not going to get, if the goal is to win and Jordan Walker hasn't shown us the ability to do that, then why are we saying that he's earned this spot in right field?
Yeah, I want to be clear about one thing too. I'm not advocating for trading Alec Burleson. Mm-hmm. I'm just throwing it on the level on the table for conversation.
And I'm not saying I'm on the record of trading Jordan Walker. I don't know. I'm just saying, has Jordan Walker shown enough to show in this runway that he can be an everyday player?
Is Jordan Walker still 23 years old? I think.
And I get that. Right. And it's the same thing with Gorman, right? Has Gorman shown you enough that
Gorman at least has a little bit more of a track record of experience as far as the number of at-bats in the big leagues.
And he's got a bigger track record of striking out too.
Gorman also plays a position where you're going to have a lot of players competing for spots next year.
You are, right? And the reason that Gorman is going to stay around is because he can hit 30 home runs. When he figures it out, he's going to do that. But are you okay with the 40% strikeout rate if he's hitting you 30 bombs?
The way the game is today, I think the answer is probably yes to that question. It wouldn't have been the answer 20 or 30 years ago, but it is today. But I would say this, the other guy, and he ties into the Gorman conversation as well, who I think is taking advantage of his runway. His runway was a little bit different because it opened up because of the injury to Brendan Donovan and then now the injury to Mason Wynn, is Thomas Saggese. You look at what his success rate has been the second half of the season, particularly in August and September. He's hitting about 280. Played very good at both defensive positions. I think he certainly can give you quality game at any of those three infield positions. So as you map out who's going to be the starting third baseman, who's going to be the starting shortstop, who's going to be the starting second baseman, who's going to be your key backup infielder, I think Saggese fills one of those spots. I'm not sure which one.
He's hitting roughly 330 over the last 15 days. So the question becomes, if he's your fourth, and
he's also 23.
If he's your, fifth infielder, right? He's your backup to play. Is he going to be able to do that as a bench player coming off, right? And that's one of the things that we said was remarkable about Joel Pozo this year, is his ability to play off there is something to be said about a player that can come off the bench and not play every day and be beneficial. But Saggese has played himself into a role. And the question is, are home runs more important or getting on base more important?
I think any way you can win a ball game is important.
We would both agree with that. But the way that our manager has constructed this lineup would tell you that getting on base doesn't matter because you're still batting Victor Scott ninth.
Well, I was going to get to Victor Scott here in a second. Here.
I'm not trying to jump the gun, but regardless, I think that Saggese has made the decision even tougher. But all of this comes down to one person. And a lot of this hinges on, like what we've talked about, Nolan Arenado.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he is still part of this team, then there really is nowhere for some of these other guys to go.
Yeah.
If he's not, you got a lot of options.
And I will say this: I think this is probably a good time for Chaim Bloom to step in and take over this club, because I do think there's going to be a lot of tough decisions to be made. And I think one of the things, not to sound like an old fogey, I've been quoting all my old longtime baseball executives here, but the other one adage that I think is true in baseball, and you've heard it for years, is talks about the subject of loyalty. And it could also it could be a blessing in baseball, but it also could be a curse. And I think the one thing that Chaim Bloom has going for him is he does not have the history with these players that John Mozeliak had. If he does feel like he needs to trade Nolan Gorman, I don't think he's going to have the same, I can't trade him. I drafted him, blah, blah, blah. I don't think he's going to have that same feeling about him and Jordan. I'm not saying they're going to trade him, but I'm thinking if it does feel like that's the trade that needs to be made, he's going to be able to do it, because he understands the way that's going to help this ball club win.
The one complaint that I have about Mo over his time here, and he's done a lot of great things, but he does tend to really value the draft picks that he has made. Now, have some of those guys turned out great? Yes, absolutely. But has there been players that we've kind of analyzed throughout the time? Now, I will say I'm going to give him a little bit of credit, because there's a couple moves that Mo would tell you to this day are the reason we are where we are today. And one of those being Alex Reyes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're kind of in this spot of needing some pitching and needing other players because some of these guys didn't work out. So the question.
And also the other thing I would throw into the pitching category would be the trade with Miami that we talked about before, when they traded Sandy Alcantara and Zach Gallen.
Yes.
That was obviously a horrible trade.
Yes, correct. Because where's Marcelo Zuna now?
Atlanta.
Yeah, for sure. But regardless, any of these things work out. But
yeah,
Chaim is not in a situation where he was in Boston where, you have to trade Mookie Betts. I think if we were to trade Nolan Arenado right now, a lot of fans would be okay with that based on how he's played.
Right.
And I think most of the guys that we trade this offseason, people would be okay with, because it's not working right now.
And I agree. I think people are ready for a change. And whether, and I think most fans are smart enough to realize that you can't, you're not going to always make a trade that everybody likes that's going to be 100% weighted in your favor. You can't, it's kind of like the old fantasy baseball trades. I'm going to trade these 7 Scribini players for, MVP All-Star. It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. No.
You'd like it to work that way.
You'd like it to work that way.
It doesn't. Yes. But all right. So we're talking about this whole runway thing. Then a couple other things that I want to point out. One is that I think a guy that's kind of, I don't want to say stalled on the runway, but he's had some very positive things, but some things maybe not quite as good as you would have expected, and that's Victor Scott. But here's the stat: 33 stolen bases. He picked up his 33rd
fifth
steal,
overall,
33rd steal on Wednesday. You know how many steals the rest of the team has combined if you take away his 33?
Well, I heard that Alec Burleson was thrown out for the first time on his stolen base the other day, 5 out of 6. So I'm going to say, as a whole, 30?
52. But nobody else on the team has more than 9, which is Mason Wynn at 9. They just don't run enough.
The thing that I don't understand is this team doesn't run. And you watch a team like the Brewers, and you wonder why they're so good. They're very aggressive on the base paths. And sure, do they run into a couple of outs?
When this franchise has a history of being that type of team, and it's proven that fans respond to that type of baseball.
Well, and
you can't buy the argument that you can't win that way,
well,
because you can win that way.
You can, and that manager had philosophical differences with our front office, and that's why he's not here anymore. Because I think he was one who understands that. And you watch them out in San Diego, what happens? They steal a lot of bases and they run. And that baseball's exciting, because the pressure instantly becomes different when a runner's on first versus second.
Oh, sure.
Right? Instantly. And they don't understand why. I don't get it. Why is Victor not able to bat leadoff, especially in a situation for the last month where this team hasn't been going anywhere?
And it's not like you have one guy who's taken that leadoff spot and run with it. I mean, you've tried Newbar there, you've tried Donovan there, you've tried Wynn there. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I don't think their combined performance is,
I wouldn't say it's that much different.
Victor, no. So that's going to be a question they have to decide too, is the makeup of the lineup next year. And Nathan Church has taken advantage of his opportunity to prove, I think, that he should, have us compete, to come to spring training with a chance to compete in a job, kind of in the big picture, depending on who else is here and who's not here.
He's played very well, right? You wish he would do a little bit more offensively, and I'm glad that he's getting some time to figure that out. But defensively, he's done everything you ask him.
Of course, this podcast here, That Rains on the Cardinals, brought to you by our great friends at the Drury Hotels. You got any fall travel plans, be sure you check out all of the Drury Hotels available to you around the country, and more coming for spring training next year if you're already making your plans for that. Spring training schedule will be announced at some point. I'm not sure exactly what the holdup is. Maybe it's the World Baseball Classic is preventing that schedule being announced. I don't know. It will come out at some point, so you can make your plans for spring training. Head down to the Homewood Suites in March in Jupiter and get some of the answers in person to whatever moves this club has made over the winter.
Spring training will be very interesting, right? It'll be interesting to see kind of who rises to the top. Does Nathan Church continue to beat out Michael Ciani or somebody like that for the 4th spot? So it'll be interesting. Or Koperniak.
The other thing, and we've talked a lot about the starting pitching, and we're not going to dwell on that today, but I think obviously McGreevy's the guy who's taking advantage of the runway as well. You would pencil him into one of the starting spots next year. I think you put Liberatore into the rotation for next year based on what he has played. Maybe not quite as good as you would have hoped for, but I think in his first year as the full-time starter, I think you have to be basically pleased with the results, and he's seen the potential there for him to get better. So you're going to be a couple openings that you have to have in that starting rotation, but I'll say this too. I think they're going to have at least 3 openings in their bullpen. They're going to have to rebuild that bullpen.
And before we go too far off the starting pitching, we cannot skip over Andre Palante.
Because why can't we?
I would have a long time ago. But clearly they think that there's a path for him to be here next year because they keep starting him every game. If they didn't think that he was going to be a starter next year, he wouldn't be pitching. In my mind, they'd be throwing somebody else. But clearly they don't think that they have a starter that's ready to take his spot in AAA or AA. And so they must think that he's going to have a shot next year. And there's no way this team can win when he can't throw a competitive start out there.
No. Very, very, very disappointing, and I think that's going to be a factor over the winter as well. I will say this, I heard somebody else say this on a different podcast, but I believe 100% to be true. If I'm going into this winter evaluating all of the different players on the Cardinals, including prospects coming up, there's one, potentially 2, I guess I would say 2 players that to me are untouchable, that I would not consider trading. And I'm saying we're not trading everybody else, but I'm saying that I at least wouldn't have a conversation. You're not going to trade J.J. Weatherholt, and I don't think you trade Raynel Rodriguez, 18-year-old catcher at Palm Beach that 20 home runs combined this year. I think everybody else is on the table. I think that they have to be on the table, and let's see what we can do. I think you're going to see a dramatic difference in this lineup next year.
I haven't seen enough of him yet, but I would probably also throw Liam Doyle in that conversation.
Well, I had him written down too. Yeah, you're not going to trade him
just because you haven't seen enough.
No, you're not going to trade.
Number 1 pick.
You're not going to trade him. Obviously, no.
But I think the pitching staff, both starting and the rotation, are going to almost have to be completely rebuilt.
I think so.
I think you can safely say that Sonny, McGreevy, and Libby are 3 of your 5 starters, and there's a handful of guys in the bullpen.
Also a possibility you trade Sonny Gray too,
and there is that possibility, right? But I think when you look at it and say, I don't know where these other 2 starters are coming from, you probably don't want to make a bigger hole that you have to fill, because the one thing that Sonny did all year is he stayed healthy and he gave you innings.
True.
And we've seen that from a lot of people. The Brewers still took Eric Fetty because they need innings, right? So we've seen stranger things happen.
I would say too, probably that the chances to me of Sonny Gray staying increase if you're able to trade Arenado because of the financial part of it. If you feel like you're going to have to keep Arenado, then maybe you look at trading Gray because of the contract. So,
yeah, that's certainly the case too. But I think as we look at the guys that have done well in the bullpen, I mean, there's a strong case that you could say when you look at, obviously not every game is going to be perfect out of these guys, but when you look at the way that Leahy, Swanson, O'Brien, those 3 for sure have really done a nice job coming through here late in the games to pick up the closing situations.
And if they're here, I also think Romero and Graceffo are also guys. So I think you've got pencil in those 5 guys probably, but that leaves you 3 openings, shooting for 1 for another left-hander. So.
And you've got some guys, I think, in Memphis that have the potential to fill some of those spots, right? It's just kind of a what's available and what's out there as we work through the system, right? And again, what do you do with Palante? Does he become a bullpen guy? Does he go somewhere else? I don't know what you do there.
Cardinals with the day off on Thursday will host the Brewers. The final 3 home games on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday down at Busch Stadium. The Cardinals minor league affiliates, the only 2 left playing are Springfield and Memphis. Springfield in the Texas League playoffs. They won game 1 on Tuesday night, day off on Wednesday. They're going to play on Thursday night down in Springfield, being one more win to get into the Texas League Championship. So that's going to be exciting to see kind of how far they go in the playoffs.
It is exciting to see, right? Because you remember a while back, just a few years ago, both Palm Beach and Springfield and Memphis were all doing very good and getting to the playoffs and getting to where we needed them to be. And it teaches that brand of winning baseball that the Cardinals have been about and we need to get back to.
There's no question that the Cardinals need to get back to winning baseball. So, Mike, thanks for the visit.
I was just going to say that as we look at questions of who should be here next year, there's 2 more moves that I think that I would make.
What you got?
Number one, I have not seen, and I know I've been vocal about this for a while, but I've not seen enough out of Dusty Blake to show me any reason that he can take this pitching staff to any further, right? Because you talked about it earlier, Matthew Liberatore. He's done well, but he hasn't. Is that just because he's finally getting a chance to start, or is Dusty teaching him something to get him better? And he's done nothing to help change Andre Palante. So that's my first question, Mark, is do you change? Will the pitching get better by just making some coaching changes? And number 2 is Ollie. And maybe you can flip those 2 around and go 1 and 2. But, again, we've talked about some of the moves and where we think people should be. And has Ollie done enough to show that he can make this team win?
The only person who's going to have the answer to that question, both those questions, is Chaim Bloom. And I think we'll know the answers very soon after the offseason, because he's obviously had time to evaluate, and he knows, in his mind, I'm sure what moves he wants to make. And, as I say, and I think, and we talked about it earlier in the podcast too, to me, whatever move the Cardinals make or don't make this winter, they have to be focused on 2 things. They have to be focused on how do we put more of a winning product back on the field? How do we get people back in the stands at Busch Stadium? Because that's, to me, is the number. They have to address the attendance.
And I'm not saying this will happen. I'm not saying it's the answer. But do you want fans to support this team? Name Yachty your manager. I'm not saying that'll be the answer right now, but you want people to come back and support them even through the growth and the times that are there?
Interesting.
Or make him the pitching coach.
Yeah. Well, time will tell.
So we will see.
Cardinals and Brewers this weekend. Enjoy the final 3 games at Busch Stadium, everybody. Enjoy the final 9 games of the season. We'll be back with another edition of Reigns on the Cardinals podcast here on STLSportsPage.com next week. Thanks for watching, everybody.